Thank the gentleman for yielding back. Now recognize Dr. Miller-Meeks for her 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Griffith and Ranking Member Tonko, for holding this hearing today. I want to also thank our witnesses for testifying before the subcommittee. In Iowa's 1st District alone, the chemical industry provides over 2,000 direct jobs, pays over $100 million in wages, and is the 2nd largest manufacturing industry in the state. This subcommittee has the responsibility of addressing the aggressive overregulation of the chemicals industry by the Biden administration, which has severely hindered American companies' ability to innovate, grow, and compete in the global market. I believe this hearing is a strong step in the right direction toward achieving that goal. And Dr. Doa said that the EPA wouldn't restrict vinegar. But let me give you an example of aggressive overregulation. I am both a former operating room nurse and a doctor. And when the EPA came out with its rules on ethylene oxide, which is the source for non-steam sterilization with no alternative in place, what was the assessment of the best available science? What was the assessment and evaluation of risks and the cost? Was it better to have people have non-sterilized equipment put in their bodies, risk infection, sepsis, and death? I would say that is an example of overzealous regulation. Mr. Moody, as you know, Iowa is a leader in biofuels production. In your testimony, you state that when renewable feedstocks are co-processed with petroleum feedstocks, even at low percentages, EPA considers this resulting fuel products to be new substances to TSCA review. Many believe this creates barriers and delays bringing renewables to the marketplace without improving safety or reducing cost or improving the environment. Can you explain more about why you believe fuels produced through co-processing should be considered new substances under TSCA?
Thank you for the question. And I'll just say APM's members, in addition to being refiners and petrochemical manufacturers, are some of the largest biofuel producers in the country. So we appreciate your advocacy. You're correct. The EPA came out several years ago and said new biofuels are going to be subject to Section 5 of TSCA, significant new use rules, and they've been pushing new fuels through that process. From our perspective, whether it's a biofuel or a bio-based plastic, so you have a bio feedstock going into a plastic, there's going to be things that are already on the inventory that we should be evaluating against. So rather than going through an expensive, lengthy, seemingly endless process, let's look at whether there's something actually equivalent and whether there's actually any kind of real new risk there. And from our perspective, that would help conserve resources.
So the current approach would, I think, hinder our farmers' ability to increase renewable fuel production and cede that marketplace to Brazil, who doesn't have the same restrictions. And then we import it back to the United States.
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. John, in your testimony, you expressed concern that in conducting TSCA risk evaluations, EPA makes arbitrary assumptions about workplace exposures, such as assuming workers do not use personal protective equipment. You argue this is contrary to OSHA requirements and TSCA's directive for the EPA to defer to other agencies. As a general matter, if OSHA is already having regulations, do we need TSCA to tell us to avoid irritable chemicals getting in our eyes or on our skin? Isn't that kind of common sense and on the label?
Absolutely. So the Biden EPA assumed that they weren't wearing PPE. They assumed that they weren't doing that even if they were required to do so by law, to be clear about that. And as well as the industrial hygiene protocols that our members put in place. This is not an accurate assessment of how our members operate. And, it's just ignoring reality and doesn't make sense, and it creates government duplication, which is part of the problem we're talking about here today.
And it may be why they don't have enough time to focus on getting their reviews done within 90 days.
Exactly.
The amended TSCA requires EPA to use the best available science, Dr. Engler, and when evaluating chemical risk, but the law does not define this term. Critics argue the EPA's recent risk evaluations have either overstated or understated risks. How do you think best available science should be defined, and what changes, if any, are needed to EPA's process to ensure it is using appropriate scientific standards?
Well, the best available science it's got to be based on quality experiments that are objective and reproducible. Good science is good science regardless of who funds it, whether it's industry or academia or an NGO or the government. what we've seen, and we've seen uneven results in the existing chemicals risk evaluations. Some of them, in my view, have been based on sound science. Others, EPA is using the lowest number they can possibly find and using that to justify their existing chemical exposure limits, regardless of the departure from other regulatory agencies or other scientific bodies.
Thank you. I have a question on formaldehyde risk, but my time has expired, so I'll submit it to be answered for the record. Thank you, and I yield back.